changing world orders and its implication for humanitarian action. And today we are specifically focusing on a regional area, the title being Gulf Rush, Opportunities for Diversification and Challenges in Making It Work. So we're really zooming on how to deal within the current geopolitical shifts with reorienting also as organizations and as countries, maybe even, to diversify the partners that we work with. And we have two excellent speakers that are going to share their wisdom and knowledge with us on this. Before I go ahead, just some words on KUNO. For those of you that are in the room and may not be very familiar with KUNO, KUNO is a knowledge platform for on knowledge exchange for humanitarian action. It is a platform that is of and for the humanitarian field in the Netherlands, so including INGOs, UN agencies, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that together set the program for KUNO, but also guide and attend the sessions that we organize. So very welcome to KUNO, and please also reach out to us if there are issues that you would like to place on the agenda, that you would like to share and deepen knowledge about, so, because that is what KUNO facilitates. Right, having said that, moving back to the meeting that we have in front of us today. We will hear from two speakers. I'm going to introduce them both to you now. First, we will hear from Yannick Dupont. He's a development committee member at the Netherlands Advisory Council on International Affairs. He's also advising Global Shift, and he is on the program board of DIAD. He can tell you a bit more about that himself also, if he wishes to. And after Yannick, we will hear from Mohamed Skaik, of the Gulf Cooperation Council Partnerships Director and Global Shift. Welcome, Yannick, and welcome, Mohamed. Thank you for being here and speaking with us. Each of you will share your contributions, and after that, there will be space to engage with each other, also in the audience. If you have questions during the talks of Yannick and Mohamed, please feel free to share them in the chat, and then we will return to them after both have spoken. Right. Without further ado, Yannick, it's our pleasure to invite you to share with us what you have to what your wisdom.
Well, I hope it's some wisdom or a lot of lessons learned as well today, and great to see a lot of familiar faces on the call, both from Holland, but also from some friends I see from Germany dialing in, and other places in Europe. Yeah, so first of all, I mean, full disclosure, I worked with Mohamed for 18 years. Maybe Moa can say something about that before, when he set up the first, he's very modest, he set up the first and most funky technology incubator in Gaza for the Gaza Islamic University, then moved to Istanbul when I was also based there, and we've been working 18 years on and off. And he's really been the driver on how to make it work. So yeah, I think really questions on how it really operationalizes are well directed at him. For the purpose of this talk, I will focus more also on the rationale and why now I see this major development of diversification occurring also with the Gulf. And maybe to start by saying that this call would not have been really possible 5 years ago, literally. It's a bit like 15 years ago, it was not possible to disclose that you're working with the private sector as a development organization, because you would be suspect to be, are you an NGO, you're a company, the private sector is for profit, but we've come a long way there. And then more recently also with the Gulf. So I've seen a 180-degree change almost over the last couple of years in dealing with the Gulf. Still legitimate concerns. However, I think the concerns have given way to a more pragmatic approach and maybe a more tailored approach of finding partnerships there. Main concerns, of course, and we can delve later into it also with the Q&A, are still mostly around, how can you work with countries that are violating human rights? How do you know where the funding is coming from? But these kind of concerns are now getting less and less, because I think there's more and more a body of evidence which groups in the Gulf are actually very legitimate, where United Nations organizations, or for example, the ICRC, the Red Cross movement, is actually also drawing increasingly funding from. And these are not known to be organizations that tread lightly when they do the due diligence on their partners. Yeah, so we've seen this really change. The other major change that I think occurred in the last a bit over 2 years has been, in a way, triggered by the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. In that, just after that invasion, a policy paper was adopted by the Council of the European Union, which is called the EU Strategic Partnership with the Gulf. It was already under preparation, obviously, and at the time in our prior jobs, both in me and I worked for Spark, we contributed to that paper. So we knew it was already coming, but then with the invasion, it was pulled forward and released rapidly. I think already due to a realization that the European Union needs to strengthen its partnerships with the Gulf, as also countries like China and the Russian Federation are doing so. So you saw already 2.5 years ago that paper being released, or 2.5, 3 years ago. And then more recently, for those of you that really want to know more about European policy, there was an EU Council summit in Brussels with JCC leaders in October last year, where again, this was all reiterated. Now, that EU Gulf partnership is mostly about other matters like energy, security, political collaboration, but it has a chapter on humanitarian and development. That was actually written or coordinated by the former DG of ECHO, the humanitarian organization. I think all of you here are partners of ECHO, I would estimate, or almost all. And that DG, Michel Keuler at the time, he's an Arabist by training. He coordinated that chapter. By the way, now a member of our advisory board at Local Shift, he joined. He retired last year. He's now EU ambassador for the Grand Bargain. I'll explain you why that also matters. And so we see that basically when I, just to give you one anecdote, when I was speaking to Michel Keuler about this and knowing that he was retiring, we asked him, let's join forces to promote the EU Gulf Cooperation on Aid. He was immediately positive, saying, yes, it's finally the moment. For his whole career as an Arabist, he was actually promoting it. He was for it, but it was always very difficult in institutions to actually get the political weight behind it. But now all of a sudden it has shifted quite dramatically over the last 3 years. So I think one general observation is that whereas before it was problematized, it was seen as a risk. It was seen as something you don't really engage with in general terms. I think now we've seen that shift happening. Now, another reason why, and I think maybe Moa can also shed a bit of light on that, is working with the Gulf, of course, is also quite complicated because you have different Gulf states. So until 3 or 5 years ago, there was a moment when it was again problematized from the Gulf side, and it's still sometimes sensitive that working with one Gulf state can sometimes make it more difficult to work with another one. So there is a lot of competition. I think we complain within the European Union sometimes about different views. But some of these Gulf states are rivals, even to the extent that in 2017, the state of Qatar was actually, they had an air and sea blockade initiated by Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. And I remember at the time when we were working with both Qatar and starting to work with the Emirates, that actually people would be quite hostile in meetings sometimes, saying, whatever you do, we can still work with you, just never put my logo next to their logo on your activity, for example. Or people really saying bluntly, if you work with that part, you cannot work really with us. And so that has been papered over. I think the war in Gaza has made it also easier in that sense that I think there is more unity right now in the JCC than for a long time. However, when you delve a bit deeper and you have deeper, meaningful conversations with people you trust there, you will still hear that these things do matter still in the background, but they're not so much visible. Now, I think there is one thing, but this is why I'm also very happy. I see Ok from Novib on the call. Is that of course the whole Gaza war has now complicated the cooperation from the other side. I think until the war in Gaza happened, my only concerns that I was mostly hearing was from the European side saying, why should we work with the Gulf? And the Gulf actually very much promoting and asking and actually requesting meetings, if we could set up meetings with politicians in the Netherlands, at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or in Brussels. So there was a big push. But since the war in Gaza, obviously, some of the Gulf parties are quite reluctant in choosing their European partners. In their blunt words, sometimes we want to work with people that do not support genocide. So the way that they look at, or that some parties in the Gulf look at the at cooperating with Europe, your positioning on the file matters a lot. I mean, either expressed or not expressed. So I think that's also actually, in that sense, good that the Dutch organizations have the protest again and went to court and are fighting basically for humanitarian values in Gaza. I think this is also what makes, in my view, partnership between Dutch humanitarian entities and the Gulf very likely and would actually be a very good moment to join forces on, for example, Gaza. That all being said, so just to paint it again, I think in the last 3 years, a heavy backup from the European Union on the Gulf relations, a very big rush, this is also the title, of some European countries to start up that cooperation. So if I can mention countries that are way ahead of Holland, Switzerland, for example, the United Kingdom, traditionally the US, although it's a bit cooled down now. But even places like Norway that actually have designated diplomats in the region, in the Gulf region, to work day in, day out on strengthening humanitarian and development cooperation. You see them popping up, getting keynote slots at major conferences in the Gulf. You see them at the Jihad conference, which is the largest humanitarian conference annually in the Gulf. Where they have a huge stand, where they have a huge presence, where they send high-level political representation. The Netherlands, I think, as a state has been, let's say, slow to respond. I think it's not been prioritizing this. Part is, I think, because of the concerns that I already referenced. There is a problematic relation regarding human rights dialogue with some of these countries. But for all the various reasons, Holland as a country is still behind. So that would also be my major point, I think, to wrap up with before we go to Moha. And then later on the questions will dive a bit deeper, would be we need to mobilize, in my view, as a humanitarian Dutch sector to put Holland on the map. But we also need to work with the Dutch Foreign Ministry increasingly to get that position there, because other countries like Switzerland, with ICRC and the Red Cross leading, but also Britain and others are way ahead of the game, and building quite amazing partnerships and cooperation. And I think we need to incentivize and help our government a little bit in making that step. Maybe one last thought. I promise that was the last thought, but just one more. Is that when people say working with the Gulf, the primary reaction we get is, okay, that's a financial positive, especially in the times of slashing and seeing funding going down. I understand one of your prior sessions was on that topic. The main ask is very often financial, but in fact, working now 12 years with the Gulf, the main impact I've seen was non-financial, but was actually access to difficult crisis zones, was actually getting, for example, our organization registered in Libya, East-West Libya, within 8 days. 8 days. It took, I think it was GIZ and AFD, our German and French colleagues, between 1 and 2 years. It was purely because of the partnership with the Islamic Development Bank, who then picks up the phone, calls their member state, calls warring parties on both sides, and arranges the clearance within almost a week. So the political access, the trust that comes with working with some of these countries is extremely valuable. And I think none of you would have by now missed the power of mediation of a state of like Qatar, in Afghanistan, in Gaza, but also the Emirates, increasingly Saudi, increasingly mediating. So they're increasingly taking a political role. Which, of course, and I'm quite sure there will be questions on that, can also be problematic because not all their involvement is, of course, positive in conflict zones. But I'll leave it at this, and I hope I triggered some questions for later.
Thank you so much, Yannick, for sharing your experience of many years, and also already posing some questions to the audience, indeed, and a very clear call on more engagement. I think your last added point was very relevant, indeed. That is, what is the added value, indeed, of collaborating beyond that collaborating in itself can be beneficial. Right. Then we move on to Mohammed Skeik. Your turn to share with us your story. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Corinne, and thank you, Yannick, for the start. You never leave anything for me to add to the point, but I'm gonna try indeed. I just go back 10 years ago when Yannick and I have started to draw Spark's strategy behind engaging with the GCC countries and OIC member countries. And the first question that we had in our mind, why? Why do we have to do so? Did we have budget cuts by then? Any threats on kind of income into the organization? No, the answer is no. We thought it would be strategic indeed to have such kind of partnerships because one, in terms of income, it will grow our income. Two, it will also provide us with a great support to have access within our target countries, first beneficiaries, respect that they have. And then we started. Spark, by then, if I go back to our journey at Spark, was only receiving funding probably from the Dutch government and the EU, exactly like the situation with many other European organizations. But then within a few years, we became also one of the really leading organizations that would have partnerships East and West. And that was a powerful position in our work, not only financial, as I meant, but also in terms of access, expansion, and also dealing with partners and so on. So beside what Yannick has mentioned indeed of the political sensitivity and considerations of really the need of expanding partnerships with the GCC countries, I would start always for the organizations who are like basically seeking such kind of partnerships to ask why. Is it only because we have some kind of financial challenges and budget cuts that we need to expand our partnerships? If the answer is yes, I totally advise not to do so because that would not probably be successful. If you think that would be strategic for the success of your business, for the growth of your operations and countries, it's inevitable to work with them because of so many other added values. I would strongly recommend all organizations to start thinking of this. We found it, as I mentioned, inevitable to work with those partners, development partners in the GCC member countries and the OIC member countries as well, because there is GCC, but also at a wider scale, there is the OIC, where also you can find organizations like the Islamic Development Bank and other organizations who are extremely useful and professional, and with them we've had really long partnerships in terms of what we did basically. If we agree on the why, then we can ask, okay, how can we, in fact, or how did we basically build our partnerships? And first, in business terms, we have basically it hasn't been an easy journey, to be honest, because as a European organization, an organization that is based in Europe, probably the whole narrative that we've been using or the whole plans were not set enough to be aligned with the other counterparts, basically plans and strategies. So we had to understand how can we build a multi-year strategy with them to engage. It wasn't like something that has happened overnight. We had the strategic patience, what we call, to the level that we had some points discussions whether we need to move on or not. But once the first contract that we signed, Yannick, you remember maybe 8-9 years ago, has been sealed, it all went really fast because we have basically understood the process in building such kind of partnerships. The issue with many other friends at European organizations in the Netherlands is that once they go to the GCC partners, the only thing that comes to their mind what in fact they need. So I need to have a project in some kind of partnership in a project in Lebanon or Jordan or Palestine or Iraq or Egypt. And I have some kind of a need and I need to build such kind of partnership because I need it. but we did it the other way around. We started from what our counterparts would need. So what are their plans? What are their strategies? What are their preferences? How do they select partners? How do they build partnerships? What are the things that they focus on? How do they do due diligence? What are the things that they're sensitive about? And then from that, we basically have been responsive to such kind of important facts that helped us being successful in building, like, I think probably 10 partnerships in the GCC member countries over the last basically 9 years. So it's important to start of understanding the counterparts. Who are they? What do they want? What are their plans? How do they decide on their partnerships? Who are there to communicate to? Because sometimes just communicating with very formal ways of communication would not work. And that's something very important that organizations have to really, and that's one of our successes that basically the communications went so closely to the point that we can speak on their behalf, on their plans and preferences. We become such kind of partnership, strategic partners. It's not only that we want them to support us, but we also support them in terms of providing more context, more access, more success stories, more best practices. And this is how it goes. And then I mentioned also the immense communication that is needed over day and night, weeks, months, years, probably, of like visiting, building trust, transparency, being honest, not only just to sell, but also to show weaknesses, as long as also strengths. And how can we really build and cover and fix the gap in our basically performance. When working with our partners at the GCC, it's very important that we together with them agree on how to select local partners, because they care about localization as well. They always have their also fears of like Western organizations or international organizations coming to our country, being a main implementing partner or something, and then they pull out of the country once projects are out or finished. That's something really important to focus on, localization. How can we work with local partners, local groups that also are somehow compliant to the processes of those partners, so that they can also take the lead on the local development once the project is over. Very important point to think about is the added value that we offer as organizations. And the added value is basically is not just being in Europe and register there with a couple of white blue eyes men or colleagues, but also in terms of quality implementation, in terms of building the capacity of the partners, in terms of providing support to beneficiaries, what content we have, what networks we bring, what heritage in terms of expertise we put on the table, so that our counterparts in the GCC would feel the value of working with us. And it's always about competition. So it's basically a competition with other organizations in the West, but also organizations in the East. Also, you have the UN. We're talking about competition. Basically, it's if we're talking about a pledge through which, for example, a partner in the GCC is working with multiple organizations. So it's very important also to understand the way we work. Maybe, for example, we won't see, for example, tenders published for projects that we can apply. Maybe it happens, but really rare. The type of partnerships there is really to build it by leads. So you create a lead, you proceed with it, you develop it with them more and more until it becomes a real project that is signed. Sometimes tenders or bids are published, but then also you will be well positioned in terms of assessing all the applicants, because you've been useful in terms of planning this and understanding more the need of the donor or the partner in that one. So consider a different way of working with them. You have to understand the decision-making mechanism. What are committees that are there? Do they work according to a professional structure? Of course. If you dig more, you will understand. They're all professionals. They have their own processes. They have their own structures. But we need to understand it. So, and don't compare it to the environment in the EU. It's going to be like that. Probably it's, somehow structured in a different way, but they also have their own decision-making mechanisms through which you can build such a partnership. Very important to understand the cultural and the religious sensitivities. Yes, probably I'm not talking about the religious type of interventions, but it's very important while while we plan for our projects, to understand that we are working in countries that have such kind of local values, sensitivities, and important things to consider. We did this and we succeeded. Once you get the trust, I think the trust opens new doors, and you will be some kind of like, okay, a de facto kind of strategic partner when it comes to specific type of activities in specific countries. So understanding this kind of sensitivity would definitely help you in building such kind of partnerships with those counterparts. Transparency and trust, one very important point, and I still remember one of our strategic partners in Kuwait would mention, hey, look, I can sign with you now 10 times of what we signed together when we signed a project to support Syrian refugees and scholarships. We signed an amount, I think it was 2 million or 1 to 2 million. But he said, man, we can definitely sign a bigger amount, but please always come with an honest assessment of what you can actually deliver. And you remember, Yannick, that time, because once you deliver this really in an effective way, we can build this together. Unfortunately, many organizations try to overestimate their implementation capabilities, and then they ask more than what they can deliver, in fact, in terms of project and activities. Very important to show to our counterparts in the GCC is that we're not looking to them as a wallet. It's not only that just we're seeking funding from them, but it's very important to show that the partnership goes beyond the financial support, financial and non-financial support, their expertise, their content, their networks, their access, as mentioned by Yannick, a couple of examples as well in Libya and other countries. So maybe these are the hints that I just wanted to kick off in terms of my slot, but I'm pretty sure that this would bring more questions, and I'm happy to answer all once there is any. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, on a very clear story on the why and how of the collaborations with the Gulf Cooperation Council and the states belonging to it. I have seen some questions already in the chat. Maybe just in general for people, you can pose your questions in the chat. You can also raise your hand if you have a question. We will collect a number of questions and then open up again to Yannick and Mohammed to respond to your questions. So make sure not to lose out on the moment. Maybe we can start with Abebe that is here in the chat from Dorcas. Would you mind opening your mic and stating your questions? So you have two or one comment and one question maybe.
Okay, thank you. This is Abebe from Dorcas. I'm working for Ethiopian branch. We do have office in Yemen, Jordan, Syria, and Egypt. So somewhat we do have touch with the Gulf area. So I would say security as well as sometimes lack of long-term funding, as well as radicalism might be one of the challenges for humanitarian organization in the areas. So we do have some projects in Somali, in Ethiopian part, so it's still do have touch with those Yemeni border areas. So the cultural incompetency or incompatibility of culture might be one of the challenges that can hinder those humanitarian organizations working in these Gulf areas. So that is the areas I would love to have more explanation from Mohammed. Thank you.
Thank you, Abebe, for those questions. I see a hand raised by Lila, but I've also seen a question by Viliana in the chat. Maybe Viliana, do you want to go first? And then I'll come to you, Lila.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm working for World Vision, and it's on the perception on working with INGOs. If you talk in terms of partnerships, so what type of partners are in certain partnerships? And I know it's very generic; it can differ from from every time. But what is the general perception maybe on working with INGOs?
Thank you for that question, Lila.
Yes, thank you, Corina, and really thank you very much, Yannick and Mohammed, for this constructive story and to learn from your success. I work for the Klingendahl Institute, and we've worked with a lot of the diplomatic representation from the countries you referred to, including the GCC as an organization. So it's great to hear your experience with it. I think I have two questions, but I would briefly. The first is, in this time of new opportunities that Yannick previously called difficult to imagine, but now it is possible. What kind of strategic ideas would you give if there's an increased set of partnerships? People that would like to work with the GCC. It's one thing if you're one of the few, but what if there are many? And what kind of reflections would you share in order to coordinate that level of partnership well, either at diplomatic level or from the INGOs? I just wonder what your thoughts are on that. If there are way more hands being reached out, that's beautiful, but how to stay strategic in it. And the other is, I don't know if you have experience with working with other regional cooperation structures, maybe the Arab League, and how were they at the time involved in your discussions, or maybe that's not something you can comment on, but be very keen to hear your reflections on the other one of the other regional organizations that are there. So that will be my two questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Leila. Very clear, your questions. I see another question here from Yazid Shekem. Would you mind reading it out? Please.
Yes, sure thing. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Great. No, I was wondering about how that GCC aid funding is actually being split. If you look at direct humanitarian assistance versus infrastructure funding versus development programming, some of which, if you look at that, some of them are immediate needs, others are longer term needs, some are stabilization needs, etc. And also given that, for example, Saudi, I think half of its aid funding or budget goes to Yemen, that may change. So I was wondering about those dynamics and how that is potentially expected to change, but or if there's any ballpark in terms of how that split is, direct assistance versus infrastructure versus development. So that would be my question. Over.
Thank you very much, Yazid. Very clear also. I see more questions coming in, but I'm starting to worry about time now. I want these questions, I would like them to be responded to. So I'm going to invite Yannick to respond, and then Mohammed. And then I think we're pretty far in the time already by the time that the answers have been done, but let's see how far we get. Yannick, can I hand over to you first?
Yeah, sure. And don't worry, Mo, I'll leave some for you this time around. I think one that I was the INGO, right? How are INGOs perceived? Now, I think on the upside, what you have is you have brand, you have network in Europe, you have capability to influence policy in the West, maybe also on issues like Gaza. I think these things are seen as positives, especially if you are, let's say, susceptible to a more unbiased, as people see it, way of working. If you like, truly humanitarian way of working in crisis zones. Those are all positives I think you can leverage. I think the negative side, negative perception of INGOs are the redundant middlemen taking huge percentages for massive salaries and for headquarters. That's an obvious one. That links to Moa's comment about localization, and I cannot emphasize this enough. On every conference I attended this year, localization was everywhere, and especially one quote from KS Relief, head of partnerships, Hannah Omar Dihad, 2 weeks ago. She said, it's not anymore business as usual. We don't give any more money like that to international structures. We need to see how their localization really operates, not what they're declaring they're saying, but no, we will ask the local partners how they're perceiving it. And if it's not good, we don't buy, in a way. Now I'm just paraphrasing, but I get that from a lot of groups in the Gulf. I think because of the slashes in aid, they feel now more emboldened that they're not just giving money, but also they want to give some values. And I'm very happy with regard to the localization value they're now underwriting. So as an INGO, if you're really smart, I would say boost your true localization policy, not your declarative one. Then on strategic, yeah, for Leila, I think my first comment would be go as a state. So I'm very jealous. I cannot hide this. But when I was at Dihad, Switzerland had a huge stand at the Haat, with 12 Swiss organizations all together in one stand as Switzerland. Then you have the Swiss DG. So let's say our DGIS, the Pascal of Switzerland. She was their keynote speaker. Then when the minister of the new EU8, they're opening an EU8, an agency of the Emirates, when he came and speak, and the deputy minister closed the conference, first meeting clearly with the Swiss, because they're profiling politically as a unit and putting forward a proposition on humanitarian development. Of course, they have the ICRC, they have a lot, and the federation there. I think Holland and we as Holland really need to leverage that. You mentioned diplomatic academies. Politics and aid are very closely connected. Also in Holland, by the way, most of these things are very connected to Holland as well. But I think we need to unite that more, because otherwise we're going to be played off the chessboard. Anyway, the money will be taken by other great players from other European countries. So nothing bad for development, but not good, I think, for this group. And other Arab groups, yeah, well, I did something last year in November for the Arab League. Invited to one of their conferences before. We spoke quite a bit with them, but that's not, I don't see them as being very operationally active or very influential. Also, the JCC Council as a secretariat is not that impactful. For the purpose of aid, I would really recommend also to look at the Islamic Development Bank. They fund mostly, that's another question, infrastructure. However, they're a neutral body. They sometimes have trust funds where Gulf states put money into, and then you can basically draw on a let's say, more neutral, non-partisan group like the Development Bank is, to work with. Although, also to come back to that point about the Dutch approach, Belgium, Enable, GIZ, AFD, they're all meeting at top level with the president of the ISDB in the last year. So they're very active. Holland is, with all respect, I mean, with all the great efforts of embassies and some individuals, is not in the league, not even close to that league yet. So I think that's really a call for action. And maybe to the point on humanitarian aid, I'll leave that to Moha and the cultural one as well. I think he's much better positioned on those anyway.
Thank you very much, Yannick. Then we'll indeed hand over to Mohammed. And Yannick, maybe I can just invite you. There are some other questions in the chat. If you are able to respond to those, then at least we have offered some response there, because I worry that we don't have time to address them in verbally. Mohammed, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you again, Corinne. For Abibi point on cultural incompatibility and your work in Yemen, Jordan, Syria, I think we have passed the point where we can still say that there are cultural incompatibility. And during our work with partners in the GCC, we've seen a full alignment with our values, cultural core missions as well, with our counterparts. We, in fact, align with theirs because we've seen it more appealing to the local needs, to the local understanding. And to be honest, if you are seeking a partnership with some counterparts in the GCC, mostly like as mentioned by Yannick, for example, the Islamic Development Bank and other organizations, I think they just have a perfect cultural understanding to the situation, whether you, as you mentioned here, for example, the radicalism or security challenges or limited fund for development projects. So from our expertise, we don't see any kind of cultural incompatibility. We didn't see, of course, if there is something that pop up during the implementation or even during the design, we always discuss openly, transparently, and we always came to a point of agreement that would still keep their parameters and would still keep our parameters, and we never had any kind of incompatibility with on the ground. I've seen a couple of points on where the funding is going to, and how is being split between humanitarian and development. It's 2 points basically. One, you will never change the allocations from the top end of a state or a country on what goes to the humanitarian or what goes to the development. My piece of advice is to align with this somehow. You may come to a point where you can still influence some kind of increasing more funding towards development, more funds toward humanitarian or others. But since we're still talking about how to still work with the GCC counterparts, I strongly advise to really somehow align, because you would find them, in fact, really in terms of their planning, they've done all the plans, they understood what is needed at the moment, and they are really few steps behind. In front of us, we were even behind some cases. In some crises, we always found our counterparts in the GCC in front of us steps. Earthquake in Turkey, for example, or Syria. We were just planning when we found our counterparts in the GCC inside Syria providing truck support. You remember, Yannick, during the earthquake, for example. They're always fast, and they always need what is needed at the moment and what could be done. So how to influence this, probably that's another discussion. But I think they all the time have logical and realistic some kind of allocations in terms of what they have, the resources. Can this be influenced? I think yes. If you can reach out to a point where you can be in the co-design, in the design phase of their plans and initiatives, where you can still influence what goes to where. You mentioned, Yannick, on strategic ideas to work with the GCC of Layla's question. But I also strongly advise, beside working with them, to form consortiums. And consortiums, in fact, sell in terms of offering multiple added values. So let's do consortiums, West and East local organizations, so that when we go to our counterparts in the GCC for crises like Syria, Palestine, Gaza, or wherever, Yemen, I think you bring on the table a great added value where everybody can definitely value and would love to work. And always have, if you're a salesman or somebody who's working in business development, why this partner in the GCC has to work with me as an organization? What do I offer to them before I go to ask for any kind of like funding or so on? If we have this prepared, if we do really the needed preparation and design, we will have you will have the outcome that you expect definitely for your plans.
Thank you. That was your concluding answer, Mohammed?
Yeah, I think Yannick has covered some. I covered some as well. If there is something that is still pending or unanswered, I would love definitely to.
Yeah, no, I think it was very clear and very complete and unique. Yeah.
Maybe one thing on what Mo and I mentioned. I think I love that example. Like, I remember the day after the earthquake, I called some of my friends, including also in The Hague, but also other capitals, saying you need to transfer money right now to the white helmets in Syria, like now. And then a lot of the Europeans started, no, we need to go to UN, INGOs, we need to cross border, we need to discuss. In 24 hours, the Gulf states had trucks rushing through the border post in Turkey, cross border, sending aid to the helmets and others. Okay, they were active, they were saving lives. Much of the international response came a month later. So in that sense, I think why do I like the example that Moa gave is that we need to understand that in some aspects, these Gulf states are way ahead of us by now. They're way ahead of us by now. I think we need to wake up, smell the coffee, that it's not anymore us leading. We know that, especially in the current political, it will not get better. So I think we have a lot to gain by engaging, and also by getting access to conflict zones. That's another big thing I want to underwrite. It's not for me financial. It's if you want to work in certain conflict zones, you want concessions from the Taliban. It helps if you have support from the Islamic Development Bank or Qatar, and they may have a little bit more to say right now out there than we do as Dutch. So I think that would be my main underwriting of what Moha was saying.
Right. Well, I think those messages were very clear. Thank you very much, both Mohammed and Yannick, for this very insightful and informative talks. I think we learned a lot also about how positions are shifting and have shifted indeed. Mohammed, did you want to
Well, thank you very much. I mean, we would love to answer any unanswered questions. If we didn't manage to, we're available. I think, I don't know, but we're reachable if there is something. But definitely, as mentioned by Yannick, has placed our emails. Yeah. Something to do internally within organizations to reform, to set up, and to be ready for such kind of partnerships, such things to do inside GCC member countries to understand the how the market is going, and then the how is done. Thank you very much for everybody.
Thanks so much, Mohammed. Right, and thanks everyone for joining and being so actively part of this. You have indeed the context of Mohammed and Yannick now. Just to say that we have one more session ahead in the series of KUNO, and the next session is co-organized with Oxfam Novib here. It will be on 27 May, so that's in 2 weeks from now, same time. And it will be about localization that is truly and meaningfully inclusive, locally led, and fit for purpose. So that is a nice end to this series, I think. Looking forward to seeing you then. Thanks, everyone, and we wish you a very good day. Thank you so much.
Thank you very